On the busiest street in the city, where luxury cars lined the curb like polished trophies and chandeliers glowed behind tall glass windows, stood a restaurant known for its elegance. The place had built its reputation on 5-star reviews, curated menus, and an atmosphere designed to make people feel important. Crystal glasses caught the light like tiny stars. Soft piano music floated through the air. Everything about the restaurant whispered exclusivity. For most guests, it was a place to celebrate milestones. For others, it was a stage somewhere, to display wealth, status, and power. For Amelia Carter, it was simply work. At 23, Amelia had mastered the art of invisibility. She knew how to glide between tables without interrupting conversations. She knew how to smile, even when her feet burned from standing 12 hours straight. She knew how to apologize for things that weren't her fault. Rent did not care about pride. Hospital bills did not wait for dignity. Her mother's medication, neatly organized on a kitchen counter in a small apartment across town, depended on Amelia's ability to endure. Every evening, she tied her apron with steady hands and reminded herself that no shift lasted forever. That Friday night, the restaurant was filled beyond capacity. A charity gala had just ended 2 blocks away, and many of the city's wealthiest residents had chosen to dine there. Expensive watches flashed under dim lights. Designer dresses brushed against marble floors. Conversations were loud, confident, and layered with entitlement. Amelia noticed him the moment he walked in. He did not wait to be seated. He did not look around uncertainly like most first-time guests. He walked in as if the building belonged to him. His tailored suit fit perfectly. His shoes gleamed, and his expression carried the kind of impatience that came from never being told no. The host rushed to greet him, recognizing him instantly. His name was Richard Halston, a real estate magnate whose developments shaped entire neighborhoods. Articles about his success appeared regularly in business magazines. His donations to political campaigns were whispered about in careful tones. His presence alone was enough to make managers nervous. Amelia was assigned his table. She approached with her usual calm grace, placing a menu before him and offering the standard welcome. She kept her posture straight and her tone warm, just as she had been trained. Round them, the restaurant buzzed with life. Glasses clinked. Forks scraped gently against porcelain. The pianist transitioned into a softer melody. But at table 12, the atmosphere shifted. Richard Halston barely glanced at the menu. His eyes traveled instead over Amelia's uniform, her simple hairstyle, the faint crease in her apron from hours of wear. There was an assessment in his gaze, not of service, but of worth. He began making requests before she could step away. Special substitutions, off-menu items, demands for specific imported water that the restaurant did not carry. His voice carried just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Amelia remained composed. She explained politely what could and could not be accommodated. She offered alternatives. She assured him she would check with the kitchen. It was not enough. Within minutes, his dissatisfaction grew theatrical. He commented on the decline in service standards. He questioned whether the restaurant was hiring qualified staff. His tone sharpened with each sentence, drawing attention from surrounding diners who tried not to stare. The manager hovered nearby, but hesitated. High-profile customers were treated like delicate glass, handled carefully. Avoid cracks. When Amelia returned with his wine, carefully poured and presented, he swirled it with exaggerated scrutiny. He sniffed, he took a sip. Then, with a dismissive wave, he criticized its temperature, claiming it was improperly stored. His words were not just complaints about wine. They were insinuations about incompetence. Amelia apologized again. Even though the bottle had been opened moments before from a climate-controlled cabinet. A few tables away, someone lifted a phone. Pretending to check messages while subtly recording, Another guest exchanged glances with her companion. The discomfort in the room was becoming contagious. Richard's voice grew louder. He accused her of ruining his evening. He questioned her education. He implied that people in her position should be grateful simply to have employment. Each remark chipped away at the fragile line between professionalism and humiliation. The pianist faltered for half a second. Amelia felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but forced it back. She had learned long ago that tears, in places like this, were seen as weakness. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that storms passed. That dignity was not defined by someone else's cruelty. She stood there while he continued. What Richard did not notice, in his performance of superiority, was the small black dome mounted discreetly in the corner above his table. Like every other section of the restaurant, it recorded continuously, audio and video. A recent policy change implemented after a false complaint months earlier ensured that every interaction was documented for quality assurance. It had seemed unnecessary at the time. Across the dining room, the general manager finally approached. He attempted to smooth the situation, offering complimentary dessert and a discount. Richard accepted the gesture with the air of someone granting forgiveness rather than receiving compensation. Amelia was asked to step aside as she moved toward the service station. Whispers followed, some sympathetic, some curious. Her shoulder briefly. Another waitress avoided eye contact, afraid association might draw attention. From a distance, Amelia watched as Richard continued his meal, satisfaction settling over him like a victory. He had asserted dominance. He had proven a point, at least in his own mind, but something subtle had shifted in the room. The other diners were quieter, observant. The energy had changed from admiration to scrutiny. When Richard finally stood to leave, he placed his credit card on the table with deliberate force. He did not leave a tip. He walked out into the night believing the story had ended in his favor. Inside the manager's office, however, a decision was forming. The assistant manager had already flagged the footage. Not out of revenge, but concern. The restaurant had a reputation to protect, not just for luxury, but for fairness. Staff morale had been fragile lately. Online reviews could make or break months of work. The cameras had captured everything, every raised word, every public insult, every dismissive gesture, and outside the restaurant, under the glow of streetlights, a few guests who had witnessed the scene began posting their own accounts online by midnight. The first clip was already circulating. Amelia did not know this as she rode the late bus home, staring out the window at passing neon reflections. She replayed the evening in her mind, questioning whether she could have done more, said less, stood differently. Shame has a way of rewriting memories. She stepped into her small apartment quietly so she wouldn't wake her mother. She removed her shoes. She washed away the scent of wine and polished wood. She told herself tomorrow would be another shift, another chance to endure. But somewhere in the digital world, the narrative was no longer his to control. And by morning, the cameras that silently watched everything would begin to tell a very different story. By sunrise, Ferret's story had already begun to change shape. What had started as an uncomfortable moment inside a softly lit restaurant was now traveling through timelines and news feeds at the speed of outrage. A 30-second clip, shaky at first, recorded from a nearby table, showed a sharply dressed man raising his voice at a young waitress who stood frozen beside him. The captions varied, but the message remained the same. Power humiliating vulnerability. By 8 in the morning, the restaurant's social media inbox was overflowing. Some messages demanded answers. Others offered support. A few threatened boycotts. Many asked the same question: who was the waitress? Inside the restaurant's management office, the mood was tense. The general manager, Mr. Lawson, had barely slept. He had spent most of the night reviewing internal camera footage, watching the full interaction from multiple angles. Unlike the short clips circulating online, the security system had captured everything from the first dismissive glance to the final insult. There was no ambiguity. The footage confirmed that Amelia had followed protocol flawlessly. Her posture was calm. Her tone was professional. Her responses were measured. At no point did she provoke or escalate. The humiliation had been entirely one-sided by mid-morning. The assistant manager informed Mr. Lawson that a local blogger had shared the viral clip. The blogger was known for highlighting social injustice and workplace exploitation. The caption read, "This is what entitlement looks like." She stayed silent. Cameras didn't. The phrase spread quickly. Meanwhile, Amelia woke up unaware of the digital storm building around her name. Her morning routine was simple. She checked on her mother, prepared breakfast, and scanned her phone for messages from coworkers about the shift schedule. Instead, she found dozens of notifications. Her heart tightened. She opened one link, then another. Her breath slowed as she realized what she was watching. There she was, standing beside table 12, eyes steady, hands folded. There he was, voice raised, finger pointing. Strangers were defending her. Comments poured in by the thousands. People praised her composure. They condemned the customer's behavior. Some shared their own experiences of workplace humiliation. Others tagged news outlets. Amelia felt something she had not expected, not pride, but vulnerability. Her worst moment at work had become public spectacle. Back at the restaurant, the management team held an emergency meeting. They knew silence would be interpreted as indifference, but they also understood the weight of accusing a powerful man publicly. Richard Halston was not just any customer. His developments employed hundreds. His legal team was known for being aggressive. Still, the footage was undeniable. The restaurant released a carefully worded statement by noon. It affirmed their commitment to staff safety and respect. It confirmed that internal review of security footage supported their employees' professionalism. It expressed disappointment in the behavior displayed and announced that the customer would no longer be welcomed. The statement was simple, but it was decisive within hours. Major media pages reposted it. The phrase "cameras didn't lie" began trending locally. Richard Halston learned of the backlash in the worst possible way. Through a phone call from a business partner who sounded unusually distant. He had assumed the evening would be forgotten like countless others before it. He had underestimated the power of a lens. His public relations team scrambled. They drafted statements suggesting that the video was taken out of context. They hinted at stressful circumstances. They attempted to frame the situation as a misunderstanding. But context was exactly what the restaurant possessed. That afternoon, under legal advisement, the restaurant released a longer segment of internal footage. It showed the entire sequence, uninterrupted, unedited. It showed Amelia offering alternatives, showed her apologizing repeatedly. It showed the manager attempting to appease him, and it showed Richard escalating without cause. The longer video erased out. Public sympathy solidified into conviction. Sponsors associated with Richard's developments began receiving emails. A non-profit organization quietly removed his name from an upcoming charity gala program. Investors, sensitive to public perception, requested meetings. Reputation, built over decades, was now balanced on a single night. At home, Amelia struggled to process the attention. Journalists had begun reaching out. Some wanted interviews. Others requested permission to use her image. She declined politely. She had never sought visibility. All she had wanted was stability. Her mother, still unaware of the full extent of events, sensed the tension in her daughter's posture. Amelia minimized the situation, describing it as an incident at work. She did not mention the trending hashtags or the headlines. But by evening, The story had reached national news segments. Anchors discussed workplace dignity. Commentators debated power dynamics in service industries. The viral clip played again and again, accompanied by phrases like public accountability and modern karma. Inside the restaurant, something else was happening. Customers began arriving not just for dinner, but in solidarity. Some left generous tips for servers. Others wrote notes of encouragement. The staff felt an unexpected surge of unity. Amelia's co-workers, once cautious around controversy, now stood beside her openly. They had watched the footage too. They had seen their own fears reflected in it. For years, many had endured similar moments in silence. Now, silence felt heavier. As night fell, Richard released his own statement through social media. It expressed regret for any discomfort caused, but stopped short of an apology. The wording was clinical, devoid of ownership. The public response was swift. Regret or discomfort was not accountability for humiliation. The following morning, a new headline appeared: Developers Board Reviews. Conduct of CEO amid viral video. The board of his company had scheduled an emergency meeting. Consequences were no longer theoretical. Amelia returned to work that night with trembling hands. She expected whispers or cameras. Instead, she was greeted with applause from her coworkers. Before the doors opened, it was small, quiet, and deeply sincere. She tied her apron again. The dining room filled as usual, but something had changed in the air. Guests looked at her differently, not as invisible staff, but as a symbol of resilience. Some nodded respectfully. A few left handwritten notes thanking her for her grace. Amelia felt overwhelmed by kindness. Yet beneath the support, she sensed the fragility of reputation. Viral attention could disappear as quickly as it arrived. Justice online did not always translate into real-world change. Across town, Richard prepared to enter the boardroom where his future would be discussed for the first time in years. He felt something unfamiliar pressing against his confidence: uncertainty. The cameras had recorded more than his words. They had captured a culture of unchecked entitlement, and as executives gathered around a polished table to examine the footage frame by frame, one truth became unavoidable. Power, once unquestioned, was now under review. The story was no longer about a waitress and a wealthy customer. It had become a mirror, held up to everyone watching, and the reflection was demanding more than silence.
The boardroom was quieter than Richard Halston had ever experienced. For years, meetings in that space had carried an air of certainty. Projections climbed upward, contracts closed with firm handshakes. His voice had guided decisions without resistance. Confidence had been his currency. But on this morning, the screen at the front of the room did not display architectural renderings or financial charts. It displayed footage. The same footage millions had already seen. The board members watched in silence as the interaction unfolded from beginning to end. There were no dramatic sound effects, no commentary, no captions, just the raw exchange. His tone, his posture, the waitress standing still, composed under pressure. When the video ended, no one spoke immediately. The silence was not just discomfort, it was calculation. For the company, reputation was leverage. Investors placed money where stability existed. Partners aligned themselves with leadership that reflected reliability. The viral storm had already triggered concern from stakeholders overseas. Emails from advocacy groups questioned corporate ethics. A pending contract with a community housing initiative was suddenly under review. Richard attempted to frame the incident as exaggerated. He pointed to stress, to long hours, to public scrutiny that he claimed distorted perception. But in a room full of seasoned executives, excuses sounded hollow when paired with evidence. What unsettled them most was not the raised voice alone, it was the pattern. A senior board member quietly referenced past complaints, reports of aggressive conduct during negotiations, allegations from former employees who had chosen silence over confrontation. Those incidents had never gone public. They had been absorbed quietly into settlements and non-disclosure agreements. Now the pattern was visible, and patterns are harder to dismiss than isolated mistakes. While the board deliberated, the digital world continued its relentless pace. Public opinion had shifted from outrage to expectation. People were no longer just sharing the clip, they were demanding tangible accountability. Hashtags evolved from expressions of support for Amelia to calls for corporate responsibility. Advocacy groups for service workers amplified the story, connecting it to broader conversations about dignity in labor. In the restaurant, business had unexpectedly increased. Customers arrived with curiosity, but many left with reflection. The management team had implemented new policies publicly: zero tolerance for harassment, mandatory customer conduct guidelines, visible signage affirming staff protection. The changes were practical but symbolic as well. Amelia found herself at the center of something she had never intended to start. Local media outlets continued requesting interviews. This time, encouraged by her manager and reassured by legal advisors, she agreed to one recorded segment, not for fame but for clarity. The segment aired during an evening broadcast. She did not attack, she did not dramatize, she spoke about respect. She spoke about the invisible emotional labor of service workers. She spoke about the quiet endurance many carried home each night. Her composure resonated more powerfully than anger ever could. Viewers saw not a victim but a young woman with strength shaped by responsibility. They learned about her mother's medical condition. They learned about her part-time college courses she attended online after shifts ended. They saw context that transformed sympathy into admiration. Donations began appearing in small increments through a fundraising page a coworker had created without telling her. Most contributions were modest, $5, $10, but they came with messages of solidarity. Amelia hesitated at first, uncomfortable with receiving help. But when she realized the funds could reduce her mother's treatment burden, she accepted with gratitude. Across town, Richard faced consequences that felt unfamiliar. The board concluded that his continued leadership posed reputational risk. Though they avoided language of termination in public statements, the decision was clear: he would step down temporarily while an internal review proceeded. Investors interpreted the word temporary cautiously. News outlets reported the development swiftly. The narrative had evolved from an isolated viral clip to a corporate shakeup. Analysts discussed how digital transparency was reshaping accountability for executives. For the first time in decades, Richard experienced public scrutiny without control. Charity boards quietly removed his name from committees. Invitations to exclusive events stopped arriving. Associates who once sought his proximity now maintained distance. The isolation was subtle but undeniable. At home, in the privacy of a spacious residence overlooking the city skyline, the silence felt heavier than the boardrooms had. He replayed the footage alone. Without the buffer of defensiveness, the scene appeared different. The arrogance in his posture was visible. The dismissiveness in his tone was undeniable. He saw not power but insecurity disguised as dominance. The realization did not arrive dramatically. It settled slowly, uncomfortable, and persistent. Meanwhile, the restaurant announced a new initiative, a scholarship fund for hospitality workers pursuing education, named not after an executive but simply titled the Dignity in Service Program. The announcement credited staff resilience and community support. The symbolism was deliberate. Amelia was asked to help launch it. Standing beside colleagues and management, she cut a ribbon for something that would outlast the viral cycle. Cameras flashed again, but this time the atmosphere carried celebration rather than humiliation. She felt something shift inside her. The night of the incident had left her questioning her worth. Now she understood that dignity did not depend on how others treated her, but on how she carried herself regardless. Yet even as public narrative favored justice, something remained unfinished. Accountability had begun professionally for Richard. Socially, his influence had dimmed, but personal accountability required more than resignation and reputation loss. It required confrontation with truth. Weeks passed. The online frenzy gradually softened, replaced by newer headlines. Viral stories rarely remain center stage for long, but the ripple effects endured quietly. One afternoon, an unexpected request reached the restaurant management office. It came through a legal intermediary. The message was brief. Richard Halston wished to meet Amelia privately to offer a formal apology. The management team hesitated. Amelia was informed gently, given full autonomy to accept or decline. She felt a surge of conflicting emotions: anxiety, resentment, curiosity. Part of her wanted closure. Another part feared reopening wounds. After a long evening of reflection beside her mother's hospital bed, she made a decision rooted not in fear but in strength. She agreed. Not for him. For herself. The meeting was scheduled in a neutral conference room within the restaurant before opening hours. No press, no cameras, only accountability. As the morning approached, anticipation hung in the air like a storm about to break. For Richard, the walk toward that building felt heavier than any boardroom negotiation he had faced. For Amelia, the steps toward the same door felt steadier than they had weeks earlier. Two individuals shaped by a single night were about to confront its aftermath face to face. And this time there would be no audience. Only truth. The morning of the meeting arrived without spectacle. There were no flashing cameras outside the restaurant, no reporters waiting on the sidewalk. The dining room lights were dim, chairs still resting upside down on polished tables. The building, usually alive with noise and movement, felt suspended in a quiet pause. In the private conference room near the back office, two chairs faced each other across a simple wooden table. Amelia arrived first. She wore the same uniform she had worn the night everything changed. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but as a symbol of who she was: someone who worked with honesty and effort. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, breathing slowly, grounding herself in the knowledge that she no longer stood in that room powerless. Weeks earlier, she had been the one absorbing raised voices. Now she was the one being sought. A few minutes later, Richard Halston entered. He did not arrive with assistance. He did not carry the sharp confidence that once surrounded him like armor. The weight of public scrutiny had altered him in subtle ways. His posture was less rigid. His gaze, when it met hers, did not linger with evaluation but with something closer to reflection. There were no dramatic gestures. No audience to impress. No cameras to perform for. What unfolded in that room was not theatrical redemption, it was uncomfortable honesty. Richard acknowledged the footage without defensiveness. He admitted that the video had forced him to confront aspects of himself he had long ignored. He did not blame stress. He did not question context. He accepted responsibility for his words and for the harm they caused. He spoke of reputation lost, of board decisions, of partnerships withdrawn. But he also spoke of something deeper: the realization that success had insulated him from consequences for years. That wealth had created an illusion of superiority, that he had grown accustomed to speaking without considering impact. Amelia listened. She did not interrupt, she did not seek revenge, she did not ask for further punishment. When she finally responded, her words were steady and measured. She explained what that night had felt like from her side: the way humiliation lingers beyond the moment, how it follows someone home, how it plants doubt where confidence once stood. She described the invisible burden many service workers carry daily, swallowing pride for survival. She did not raise her voice. She did not dramatize. And somehow, that restraint carried more weight than any accusation could have. By the end of the meeting, something had shifted, not erased, not undone, but acknowledged. Richard left the restaurant that morning without spectacle, but with a decision already forming in his mind. Public consequences had been unavoidable, private accountability had been necessary, now came restitution. Within a month, an announcement appeared, not through flashy press conferences but through official filings and community briefings. Richard had stepped down permanently as CEO of his company. In his place, a leadership transition plan emphasized corporate ethics, workplace training, and community engagement. More unexpectedly, he committed a significant portion of his personal assets to fund hospitality worker protections across the city. Grants were established for employees facing workplace harassment. Legal support networks were funded. Anonymous reporting systems were expanded across multiple restaurant groups. He did not attach his name prominently to these initiatives. Perhaps for the first time, visibility was not the goal. Meanwhile, the scholarship program at Amelia's restaurant continued to grow. Applications poured in from servers, bartenders, kitchen staff, people who had once believed education was out of reach. The first recipients stood beside Amelia at a small ceremony, each carrying dreams beyond the dining room. The viral storm had faded, but its seeds were sprouting in quiet corners. Amelia's own life began to change in ways she had never imagined. With the donations and scholarships, she reduced her shifts and enrolled in a full-time business management program. Her mother's treatment stabilized. The financial strain that once pressed heavily against every decision slowly eased. Yet what transformed her most was not the money or the recognition. It was the realization that silence is not the only path to survival. She began speaking occasionally at community events about dignity in service industries. She shared not just her story but the stories of countless others who had endured quietly. Her voice remained calm, but it carried conviction. People listened. Some nights when she walked home after late classes, she would pass by the restaurant and glance at the glowing windows. She would remember the night she stood beneath them feeling small, and she would remember how quickly the narrative shifted when truth stepped into the light. Across the city, Richard lived differently. Stepping away from leadership forced him into stillness he had long avoided. Without constant meetings and expansion plans, he confronted reflection. He attended ethics seminars not as a sponsor but as a participant. He met privately with employees across former developments, listening more than speaking. Redemption, he learned, is not a public statement. It is repetition, daily choices that rebuild trust slowly. Not everyone forgave him. Some wounds leave permanent marks. But in time, the anger surrounding his name softened into something more nuanced, a cautionary tale of entitlement exposed and accountability embraced. Years later, the viral clip would resurface occasionally in documentaries discussing digital justice and corporate responsibility. Commentators would analyze how a single recorded moment shifted power dynamics. Students in business ethics classes would study it as a case of modern accountability. Yet for Amelia, the story was simpler. It was about a night when humiliation felt overwhelming, and a morning when cameras revealed truth. It was about how technology, often blamed for division, had amplified justice, about how a quiet waitress discovered her strength, about how a powerful man learned that status does not shield character. Most of all, it was about dignity, something that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or demanded. Only earned. The restaurant still stands on that busy street, crystal glasses still catch the light, the piano still plays soft melodies beneath chandeliers. But there is a small plaque now near the entrance, placed discreetly beside the host's stand. It reads, "We protect dignity here." Customers pass it on their way to their tables. Some notice. Some do not. But the staff notices. And that is enough. Because on one unforgettable night, cameras recorded more than humiliation. They recorded a turning point. And from that moment forward, power was no longer the loudest voice in the room. Respect was.